All right, so I went ahead and created a new project here because there's one more feature that I would like to discuss with you about inheritance. So far, our classes that we inherited, they were especially the parent classes. They were very simplistic in a way, and they didn't have a constructor. What happens when we want to inherit a class, a parent class with a constructor? Let's go ahead and take a look at different angles. I'm going to delete this. Notice I've created a new project, as you can see here. And you should do the same. And also, all this code you'll have access to all of this as well. So no worries. Okay, so here I'm going to go ahead and create a simple class. I'm going to say class. Let's call this location. Okay, and I'm going to create a constructor or a few instance variables of type num. Now, because all of these instance variables, two namely, are going to be the same type, I can put it all in the same line. Okay, so lat for longitude. Okay, these are indeed our instance variables or member fields. Okay, different names but the same thing. And then I'm going to go ahead and create here a constructor, a generative constructor. I'm going to say location has to have the same name as the class, as you know. And then we're going to just go ahead and say that setting up our instance variable, and that longitude. Very cool. All right, now let's create another class here called elevated location. Okay, I'm going to say class elevated location, and it's going to extend or inherit from location. Okay, very cool. The moment you do that, you notice that there's a problem here because the superclass location doesn't have a zero argument constructor, which means we need to create a constructor if we are going to extend to location, because that's what we have there. Okay, we can go ahead and just click on that red bulb to help us out, say create constructor, and there we go. It will go ahead and create a constructor for us. Now notice a very interesting thing here. What's happening here is the following. We're saying elevated location, this class here, we're passing lat and longitude, but we also making sure that we're calling the super, and we pass the latitude and longitude because we need to set up the super before we set up our current class. So here we are just calling super, which is our location class. In fact, if you click here, double click, you notice that location is also highlighted there. So now at the bottom here, I can go ahead and say elevated. Let's go ahead and say var elevated is equal to elevated location, right? And I have to pass a few parameters. Let's see, I can say 23.89 and then minus 234.89 new. There we go. Okay, so now for elevated, if I go and say print, obviously I'll be able to print everything. Let's see, let's say I want to say location is equal to, I'm going to create an expression here. Okay, I'm going to pass say L location, or elevated in this case, dot latitude. I'm going to go ahead and say elevated dot longitude. Oops, it has to be an expression, not just a variable. Like that. I'm going to say elevated dot longitude, and let's keep going. Okay, that looks good. So if you run this, we should see very simply location 23 and minus 2234. So here we need to call location constructor in order to construct our elevated location, because that's what we have, because that's the contract that we have here. Now, just like we did before, this elevated location class, which extends location, it's its own class. So we can actually create our own, for instance, member variable. Let's say here num We call this elevation, for instance, right? We can do that, which means we can also go ahead and inside of our elevated location, which is indeed elevation, inside of our constructor here, local constructor, we can go ahead and say this, that elevation. Okay, which means now we have an issue here because we have to pass the next one. Let's say 90. Okay, but remember, we still have to call our location, parent location constructor for this to work. So here, completion here, I'm going to go ahead and add. I'm going to say elevated dot elevation, like such. Run, you should see 90. The same thing would have to happen also had we created a named constructor. If you don't remember what a named constructor is, go back to previous video and you'll see the example of creating a named constructor. So we would have also to do the same thing as we did here if we had constructors. So for instance, at the top here, we added another constructor. Let's just give an example. I'm going to call this named constructor. If we said location and say create, right? This is the name that we are adding to our constructor, and we would pass this that lat, essentially the same as above, and this that longitude. That means put a semicolon there. That means here, and also notice that this still works because we still have our default constructor that we created here. We could also say call the create constructor, say super dot like that, and we're passing this lat and this longitude, and still works as well. Okay, those are different flavors, different options that you have. I just wanted to show you this so you are prepared when you see something like this and you understand, okay, what's happening here, right? So if we have a default constructor or the generative constructor, any class that extends it has to also call the super constructor. If we created the named constructor, of course, we can call it as well to create our object. Again, if you notice, if you run this, we'll still do the same thing, the same results. All right, perfect. I'll see you in the next video.